It's who you know, where you sit, and how popular you are, or the titles that you possess, that determines your relative position to others. And again, that's what legalism is all about. You set up the standard so that when you fulfill it, God's got to love you. And then you set up the standard so that you look better than others. What's more important, we ought to be asking ourselves? The position we hold or the purpose of that position? So then in verse 8, he says, "You are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And call no man your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Christ. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." So there are a couple things in here that seem kind of contradictory at first when you read them, but they're really not. The first thing that the first kind of principle that we see there is the shepherd is really an under shepherd. Rabbis in Jesus' time were pretty independent spirits. They often started their own schools so that they could teach things the way that they understood them. But Jesus basically makes 2 points here. One, all of our teaching ought to come from the Lord and not from us. And 2, there's really no authority structure when push comes to shove. Yes, there are elders, there are pastors, we should respect them, but it doesn't make them better than anyone else. The second principle is the disciple is a follower of Christ, not of the under-shepherd. So the first principle is the shepherd is really an under-shepherd. Excuse me. And the second one is the disciple is a follower of Christ, not of the under-shepherd. And I say that, it's sad, but pastor worship is actually pretty rampant today. Now, it's good to look at the lives of those who follow the Lord. Paul said, "Imitate me as I imitate Christ." But it becomes very easy for us to start putting them in the place of the Lord because we can see them, we can compare ourselves to them, and we can want to be like them. But it's very unhealthy when the pastor begins to take the place of the Lord in the life of a Christian. And I dare say it can actually border on idolatry. We must be careful. We follow Jesus Christ. We don't follow an under-shepherd. And this is why Paul had to address it to the Corinthian church, where one guy said, "I am of Paul, I am of Cephas, I am of Apollos." No, folks, we are of Christ. Everybody else is all equal. Some have been placed in a position of more responsibility, of which they will be held accountable for. But we're all equal. Paul went on to say, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. We are all equal in the eyes of God. So then the third principle here is your authority is always to be subjected to the authority of the Messiah. He says here, "Don't be called instructors, for you have one instructor, and that is Christ." And the word instructor is really correct, and it's only used here in Matthew chapter 23. But in other contexts, in Hellenistic Greek that was written at the time, it was used to denote the authority of the teacher, or the one who is set up to model behavior. And Jesus is always our model of behavior. And that becomes a real problem when we set up other super Christians as that model. Because then we are so focused on them, when they begin to stray, when they begin to fall, then we're looking at them. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, but when you're driving down the road behind another car, and that other car starts, veering into the other lane or going off onto the other side, there's this innate tendency for you to just follow along with them. And, suddenly you're going, hey, where are you going? I don't want to go that way. And that can happen when we set up others as the model for behavior instead of always looking at Jesus, because even if the person over here is veering back and forth, Jesus is never veering. And so when somebody starts to go off this way, we go, hold the phone here. I'm looking up here at what Jesus did and said. Your character and your deeds are not in line anymore with what He's doing, so I'm going to keep my course going this way instead of going with you. And again, as Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, he said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. So just then, looking at these first 12 verses here, what are some things that we as Christians need to be careful of? Well, I want to give you just 4 things in conclusion. The first is to be careful to be a Christian through and through. Be careful to be a Christian through and through. The scribes and the Pharisees, they only desired to appear good when other people could see them. You know that later we're going to learn here when the people weren't watching, what were the Pharisees doing? They were conspiring to murder. They were paying off people to rat out Jesus. They were holding illegal trials. They were demanding that this person be killed and crucified. They were as unrighteous inside as they appeared righteous on the outside. And acting good on the outside but not being good on the inside, folks, that is a common thing for us. We deal with that every single day. We need to be careful that we only pray when we're with other people. That we only open our Bible when we're in church and the pastor says, turn to Matthew chapter 23. We've got to be careful that we only act sweet and nice when we're around other people. But when we're alone in our car on the freeway, or even when we're alone with our family at home, we might act a very different way. Be careful to be a Christian through and through. And if you know me, you guys have been here, you know I'm not talking about self-made righteousness. I am going to be better. It's done. No, it doesn't happen that way. And we've talked at length about the fact that it starts with relationship with God, asking